guess is the main thing.
Yeah,
The idea
happy to
is
do
that
that.
so many, yeah. Is that okay? I don't think
Absolutely.
it's so much around the youth livelihood specifically, but the challenge that we keep talking about, opportunities for young people in the rural setting. But if there's no economic growth, if there's no
Right.
drivers there of that in that way, it's very
Absolutely.
hard to skill them and
True.
especially at scale. Would
Yeah,
that
yeah.
be okay for you to comment on?
Absolutely.
Okay,
Absolutely.
perfect. And Madonna, I've got you down on entrepreneurship. That's a surprise.
Good evening, everyone. We are now live on YouTube and Cow Connection.
We're live. Yay.
So, good evening, everyone, and a very warm welcome to the Indian Rural Colloquy. Our session today is on Futures Young, Harnessing the Power of the Youth. These are some of the collaboratives of TRI with TRI Center of Excellence and Associations. We will be posting more details on each of them at the end of the session. So we have a very exciting video created by one of our own to commemorate and celebrate India's 79th August Revolution. So please sit back and enjoy.
जनता का आह्वान किया, वर्षों जकड़ी बेड़ियों को अब तो तोड़ो। क्रांति की मशाल जला गांधी बोले, अंग्रेजों भारत छोड़ो। बहुत सहा गुलामी को अब ना सहेंगे, आजादी की बात रही वो लेके रहेंगे। अगस्त की बेला में हम सौगंध उठाते हैं, सशक्त राष्ट्र के सपने को चलो मिलकर आज सजाते हैं। हर युवा को रोजगार मिले, हर नारी की आजादी हो, हर घर स्वास्थ्य सबल बने, ये गली गली मुनादी हो। हो, जन जन स्वाभिमानी हो, देश में ना रहे गरीबी, विकास ही अपनी निशानी हो। एक क्रांति फिर ऐसी हो, रगों में वही रवानी हो, कंधे से कंधा मिलाकर सबने बस यही ठानी हो।
Sector leaders will discuss the pathways and new opportunities with Alice Bugnev, Managing Director of Global in Development Incubator. The session will bring her direct ground experience and raw insights with leading practitioners and thought leaders from global experiences as pathways and solutions that can work in India. I'll now request Neeraj to take up the session forward. Thank you. Neeraj, can you?
Hi, am I audible now? Sorry, am I audible now?
Yes.
Yes, Neeraj.
Sorry for the glitch up. So thanks a lot, Chavi, and hello everyone. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are in the time zone. I'm sure you have enjoyed the sessions at India Rural Colloquy. We have a terrific and insightful session today on an issue that concerns us all, both as individually and as a society. One of the foremost opportunities facing our country, harnessing the youth dividend. India is a young nation and is expected to remain younger in the foreseeable future. 20% of the youth in the world resides in India. That's 1 in every 5 youth in the world. A particular subcategory of this is young boys and girls in the 15 to 29 age group who are outside education, employment, or training. At a staggering 108 million, they will shape our economy and society. They are aspirational, digitally savvy, and restless. We must attend to them, and clearly, a new approach, an all hands approach, is needed. On an issue of such importance, I'm very grateful to have an eminent panel of thought leaders to share their insights and lay out a path ahead for all of us. I'll introduce the panelists. So I'll start with Madam Alka Upadhyay. Madam Alka Upadhyay brings a deep passion and understanding of all issues of rural and from a very senior vantage because she has been a development administrator at the district, state, and central level. She has led largest rural skilling program, leads NRLM, which has brought together the largest collectives of women, which reaches more than 70 million women. She leads many critical initiatives of Rural Development Ministry. I'll specifically mention the Rural Mission, which is a program of transition economy and very critical for a growing India. NRLM has one of the widest and most comprehensive
Neeraj, we can't hear you.
Hi, I'm sorry. I think I dropped off. Am I audible now?
Yes, thanks.
Sorry. So yeah, so I was with Alka ma'am, who actually guides the Startup Village Entrepreneurship Program, the Women-Only Farmer Producer Organizations, National Rural Economic Transformation Project, which includes farm, non-farm producer enterprises, and setting up of enterprise facilitation hubs and such like in rural areas. In Alkesh Wadhwani and IIT and IIM alumnus, we have the right combination of corporate and development experience to bring about intersectoral insights on topic today. He currently leads the poverty alleviation portfolio for the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation's India Country Office. Deep expertise and big bet vision is what defines Alkesh. We are all richer for his interest in rural, and in short time at the foundation, many large-scale programs leveraging digital and enterprises have come up. And most critically, he is deeply committed to women collectives and empowerment. Madan is an inspiration for all of us. In his wide sweep, he covers the entire spectrum of interventions from transforming youth through Make India Capable, enabling entrepreneurial journeys, and empowering social change makers. His vision of every youth as an empowered youth, every empowered youth as an entrepreneur and job creator, and every entrepreneur as social change maker is what we are putting together in two of the global opportunity youth communities in Ramgarh and Barwani, which is looking at more than 500,000 youth through a multi-stakeholder collaborative and youth leadership. To give you a sense of his across the board leadership, he is a founder of OneBridge, Hedeldai Foundation, Global Alliance for Mass Entrepreneurship, and also a strategic advisor to UNICEF for the Generation Unlimited initiative. Last but not least, we have Aliva, who leads TRIF's youth initiatives, particularly focused on the 4E: employability, entitlements, entrepreneurship, and education. She has a rich and unique experience of both working with government in implementation and policy making, and directly with youth communities now. She was part of the Prime Minister's Rural Development Fellows Program, an aspirational program of Government of India to bring about youth energy in solving grassroots development challenges. And she has now pioneered the Yuva Compass solution in TRIF to catalyze economic opportunities for rural youth in remote locations. On a personal note, I'm also fortunate that she is my life partner and also an inspiration for me. Finally, I'll come to the host. The host for this terrific panel is very special, Alice. She has worked with big corporates globally, large investors, and international donors to build social impact into the portfolios and help philanthropists and social enterprises create system level changes. She has been instrumental in conceptualizing and designing the Global Opportunity Youth Network program, which strives to provide access to dignified, productive, and sustainable entrepreneurship and employment pathways for young people through place-based systemic shift approach. So with this, I would like to invite Alice to take us through this wonderful and exciting session. Thank you all for joining in again.
Thanks, Neeraj, and welcome to all of our illustrious panelists and also so many of the attendees. I see that many of you are passionate about this issue of rural development, youth employment, youth agency and voice. And so just want to thank and acknowledge everyone for your time with us today. I'd love to have a really genuine, if you will, conversation around what can we do. As Neeraj opened this with, is that the scale of the challenge of the youth dividend or the youth bulge can be seen as an incredible opportunity or an incredible downfall. And so this is happening, of course, in India, given the staggering numbers, but all over the world. And we're looking at young people that are out of work, out of school, or even underemployed in the informal space. Again, we're seeing this kind of scale that ultimately I feel like we cannot squander this extraordinary force of human capital, the innovation, the potential that's out there. I'm incredibly optimistic about what we can do, but the question is how. And so what's exciting and of what I've seen over the last couple of years is more and more efforts, such as the ones that each of us on this panel are leading, is how do we work together across different sectors, across different types of stakeholders, whether it's government, private sector, civil society, and so forth, to come together to really address this problem at scale and in a sustainable way. And so, what are these new approaches are some of the things that I'd really love to discuss on the panel today. I would also urge all of the attendees, if you can, to start to put things into chat. What are you interested in hearing from our panel? What are some of the questions that you'd like to be addressed? And we'll try to cover some of them towards the end of the session in the last 20 to 30 minutes. But for all of us here on the panel, this is just such an interest and such an area of passion that we'll probably even come back to after the panel closes today. And so, leading off, I'd love to maybe share a little bit of what I've been working on and maybe turn it over to our panelists as well as what have you seen and what have you personally worked on in the last several years that seems to be really making a difference in the space. And so, what I'll highlight is what Neeraj talked about, which is Global Opportunity Youth Network, GOYN. This is really born out of a deep frustration that most of the efforts in youth employment, employability, and I use that very broadly, formal work, informal work, entrepreneurship, vocational training, and placed into formal jobs, all of those activities, what we're seeing is that it's at very small scale, as I mentioned. The efforts are really uncoordinated. Youth are actually very rarely involved in the process of designing solutions for themselves. And most of the things that we're seeing has quite short-term thinking. It's very programmatic, 1 or 2 years. And so about 3 or 4 years ago, a large group of us in youth employment, got together and created this GOIN global network, really focused on place-based interventions, scaled interventions. Really thinking through how do we use the young people's, build up the young people's agency and voice to be able to co-create these solutions? How do we really think about the feedback loops in a system between these different stakeholders to have mutual accountability over the outcomes? How do we think about pathways that can really be working at scale? And what we came up with is that it's not a silver bullet. There's not going to be just one approach. And although this might not be um, revolutionary in thinking, this is actually the way that the current sector works. And so, how do we develop a suite of solutions in a particular place, really based on data and accountability of all of the stakeholders in place to be able to design these pathways for young people? And currently, we're working in more than 10 places around the world between Africa and Latin America. And in India, we're in Ramgarh, we're in Barwani, we're in Pune, and expanding quickly. And so far, one of the lessons we've seen is that people really want to work together in this way, and people are very connected to their local contexts. And so, how do we really think about this kind of approach to community driven development around the youth employment issue in rural India is something that we're really exploring at the moment. The challenges that we've had is still on the funding side, I will say, and it would be interesting to hear from our panelists what are some of the challenges you're seeing as well. Is we really are looking at a diverse set of funding, from government programming, from foundations, from alternative financing, pay for results instruments, impact investing. And so, how do we think of really bringing to the table that full set of different kinds of financing to fund this scaled agenda? And we've made quite a bit of strides on the foundation side, even interestingly using government funds. But where we lag behind a bit is still the short-term programmatic thinking from so many of the partners that we have in this space. So these are some of the kinds of progress that we're having. Getting youth involved, thinking about the contextual aspects of what's really working for a particular area, and some of the challenges that we're experiencing. What I'd love to do is maybe at this point also kind of move over to our panelist side and see if you can highlight a little bit of what you're seeing as successes, and it could be from your own experiences or things that you're seeing in the space that you'd like to share with our audience, and maybe a challenge before we move into the next set of questions. So if I can call on, if maybe we can start with Alkesh, from your perspective. What are you seeing as some of the things that are maybe 1 or 2 examples of what you see as working, and some of the challenges in harnessing the power of youth and youth employment?
Yeah. So, perhaps to start with, I won't talk about any of our own programs, but if you look at India as a whole, perhaps the biggest success story over the last, 2 decades, from maybe 1995 to today, some 25 years, is the IT industry. And they have employed millions and millions of youth. And there is no need for philanthropy there. There's no need for foundations to intervene there. The government's main role was really on 2 areas. One is for the first 15, 20 years, the government chose to enable the industry by not taxing export earnings for IT industry. And that gave them a huge fillip because it allowed them to plow capital back in the business. And the second was the liberalization of foreign exchange policies. So when firms started, and recently Narayan Murthy has written about it, it was really difficult for them to go abroad, meet their clients, just given all the foreign exchange regulations. And as India opened up, this became much simpler. Even carrying cash of more than $20 was difficult in the early days. It required RBI permission, etc., etc. But over the last 20-25 years, all that has changed radically in India, and this has enabled the sector to grow. So I suppose the lessons are that the role of government really is to enable, and if you enable, the private sector in India can often meet the challenge as they have done in the IT sector. So I just pause there.
Thanks, Alkesh. And maybe if there's anything you could also think of that's not worked, if anything comes to mind.
Yeah. So I think the part which is a work in progress, if you really look at the rural side, is that income of farmers is low, much lower than the average Indian, because some 17% of GDP is from ag and 50% of the workers are from ag. So broadly, it's clear that the average income of a farmer in India is 1/3 of that of a non-farmer. I mean, the challenges are that farmers own very small plots of land. 85% are own less than 2 hectares and are classified as small and marginal farmers. So while their income has been rising at give or take 3-4% a year, it has been lower than the non-farm sector, whether it's manufacturing or services, which has been growing at maybe 5 to 7% a year, or even in some years 8% a year. So that's something where, just given the challenges, the small size and the inability of our economy to grow fast enough to pull people out of agriculture fast enough, people are in agriculture, which is not, I think, an aspirational job for the poor, is what we find. So the failing, I wouldn't say the failing is so much in agriculture, but in our ability to pull people out of agriculture in higher productivity jobs where they would earn more.
Thank you so much. And I also really appreciate the use of very specific data and policies that have had these kinds of more macroeconomic impacts. Turning over to you, Aliva, maybe you can share a little bit of what TRI has been experiencing.
Yes, thank you, Alice, and hello, everyone. So we basically in one of the youth programs in our organization, we have tried to create local level ecosystem. So basically catalyzing the entire actors from the value chain, right from training providers to employers to mentors and to youth themselves, catalyzing that entire ecosystem in forms of rural youth hubs. So we have started last year, and with COVID and everything, with the pandemic unfolding at the time while we launched it, the traction has not been as we would have wanted it to be, because gathering together at one place and other things, there were various limitations to it. Yeah, but we realized that those are so basically we realized that these rural youths, they need spaces to explore themselves. They are in need of these safe spaces, if you can coin it like that, where they are not judged and they can come and opportunity, various career advice that I have, I can put, because largely the chunk of these rural youths are into the informal sector, and the transition is quite it's very complex and not very linear. And if we were looking at even though I don't really have substantial data to prove my point, but in our experiences, what we have viewed is the transition between youth from the school or the college or training programs to getting a formal employment ranges anywhere between 5 months to close to 2 years. So what do they do of this gap? Are any opportunities to upskill themselves, reskill, reevaluate their whatever they have? There's no one to guide, if there is a particular sector in which they kind of can take a bridge course and migrate soon. So so basically essentially the counseling services are missing. I mean that's a divide that we found. And but again coming to the positive side, side of things, unit penetration, I mean, of course, there is differential data. There is still an, rural-urban divide in terms of digital reach and spread. But currently, we see that, the digital spread has quite, penetrated to the rural villages, and youth today do have access to smartphones and internet technologies. But what they are missing is more of, these services, the support services in terms of counseling, having a peer network, having services like Urban Youth, has a LinkedIn to reach to the peer people, look up for jobs, understand various sectoral happenings. But they really don't have these means, because LinkedIn is quite urban and largely, even though you can change your language settings to it, but it's still very urban centric. So, and also, they miss out on the nearby opportunities, because largely the jobs that are listed in them, or the opportunities listed are usually in the tier 1 cities, which are quite far from where they're living. So that's where I think that, maybe, customizing all the solutions that are available and putting it together in one place, making all the solutions available to the rural youth should help them to at least, take an informed choice for their own life, and not be dependent on middlemen and, fly-by-night operators who guide them or misguide them, to say so, in taking, life-changing or career advancement decisions. Yeah. So yeah, that's briefly what we have been trying to do at TRI.
Thank you for that. And I'm starting to see some almost different forces at play, if you will. So on the one hand, and I like Ankita's comment here, one of our attendees, on the one hand, we want to make pull people out of agriculture while making it more attractive. We want to have scale and mass solutions, but we also want to have customized personal service and advisory for young people, as you're saying, Aliva. So I wonder, it's some interesting themes to explore. What are your thoughts on this, Madan, if I can turn to you? Any kind of highlights over what you've seen really working over the last couple of years, and maybe a challenge that you can highlight for our attendees here?
Sure, Alice. Good evening, everybody. Delighted to be here. Always a pleasure to learn from folks. And this is a complex system that we're talking about, right? And therefore, you'll see a lot of pulls and pushes. And I don't think there's one single answer. We'll have to kind of find that sweet spot well. From my experience over the last 10 years of Headed High and trying to create youth as entrepreneurs in rural, I've seen one thing that's consistently working and one thing that's consistently failing. One is that the moment you put youth at the center of the universe and ask them, what are your aspirations? What do you want to do? And to Aliva's point, provide them some information, some role models, etc., where they can relate to. And then you move from aspirations to talent, and inject the self-belief that each of you have unlimited potential. And we have seen enough and numerous cases where I think that unlimited potential manifests itself in many forms. Link them up to their own entrepreneurial mindsets. I'm not saying everybody has to be an entrepreneur, but there's an entrepreneurial mindset that will help them to get ahead, right? And lastly, if you were to bring technology to the play, so these four aspects of aspirations, talent, technology, and entrepreneurial spirit. If you were to mix this in some form or fashion, I've seen more often than not initiatives that bring all these four together succeeding in rural than with one or two elements missing, right? So I've begun to call this as the Rubenomics framework, right? The framework to bring the rural-urban into a continuum. And every time I get into an initiative or a thought, I try and tick off these boxes and say, are we addressing these in the right mixtures? Of course, the mixtures will vary, but you need to kind of think through these four elements. The challenge that I've seen, consistently is the intersection, that the dilemmas that we were talking about. How do you do good, feel good, and make good money? So the intersection of, I think what Rohini and the Nilakanis call it beautifully as Samaj, Bazaar, Sarkar, right? How do you bring the markets, the societal angle and the governmental angle, and what is that sweet spot, right? Where you don't have to necessarily dip into only a philanthropy-based model, or you don't have to necessarily be concerned about only the market forces and exploitations that happen on the other hand at the villages with the youth, right? Or nor do you have to be concerned about a top-down push by the government. So how do you build that model at a microcosm? How do you build that at a village, at a taluka level, where you're able to balance out these forces and find that sweet spot is something that I think continues to be a challenge. We made some progress, but there's no playbook yet.
Thanks so much, Madonna. And you know, we think very similarly to everything you're saying. I love your 4-point framework and bringing it down to what's happening kind of in a deep community way. So that's certainly a theme that's coming out. If I may turn to Alka, over to you. What are you seeing as some of the things that are working and some of the challenges in your work over the last few years? Oh, Alka, can you hear me? You're on mute if you're speaking. Oh, Alka, are you there? Maybe not. Neeraj, if you don't mind kind of texting her. Wonderful. So what I'd love to address next is getting to the heart of what one of our commentators here said, Mr. Ashok Kumar. It's a very interesting question around what will it take to bring much more resources and support to tribal belt or central eastern part of India, but basically where all the word migration is happening. There's so much that people are talking about when you really work with, as all of you have, people in the rural communities. They say, well, the decision is easy. I'm not getting enough income locally to be able to support my family. The productivity is not there, Alkesh, as you were saying. The opportunities are in the city. And of course, that migration, number one, supports that vicious cycle downwards. There's less local economic development, there's less local opportunities, there's much more exploitation and so forth. But in fact, how do we really shift that narrative? How do we think about rural opportunities? And when people talk about youth employment, what I find sometimes a little difficult is that they're saying, let's just skill young people. Let's train them in entrepreneurship. Let's train them in this and the other field. But if those jobs don't exist locally, where are they going to sell their products? Where are they going to get employed? And so I'd love to turn to you, Alkesh, to get your thoughts on how do we really credibly talk about rural youth livelihoods if we don't talk about the policies, investment, the real sustainable economic growth that has to happen in rural areas to allow people to stay with their own families, to think about what kind of jobs they can have locally. What are the mechanisms really to drive this kind of sustained growth in rural economies? Over to you, Alkesh, to get your thoughts.
Alice, before I respond to that, Alka is back. So maybe we have an opportunity and if you restate your question, she perhaps could answer it.
Okay, wonderful. Alka, welcome back. Sorry to have missed you.
Sorry, I just dropped off at the nick of the moment, as they say. A very difficult question and no specific answers to that. But what we've learned now, and especially with the current COVID pandemic reigning all over, this entire migration business has become a little dicey. And what we've learned is while there are opportunities in the city which can get quick success and quick money, but the jobs are not opening up. Agriculture is stagnant to a certain extent and not much lies over there, as Alkesh said. But the real opportunity today lies in value chain. And believe me, not only value chain, but it's the aggregation, the producer groups, the farmer producer organizations. Those are the kind of activities in which we will have to invest. We will have to get the community-led institutions and get these people engaged. So, there's this farmer base, there are women who are there. And then they don't have a connect with the market. They don't know how to package. They don't know how to transport. So it's this process of value chain addition, I guess, where a lot of activities do lie and a lot of opportunities do lie. And we are trying to build up in those particular areas. One of the things that I have noticed in rural while working in the rural development is that while we have the National Rural Livelihood Mission, which works exclusively with women. And today, believe me, as a secondary occupation or a primary occupation, women are engaged somewhere or the other. In farms, they might not be paid equally, they might be underpaid, but they're engaged somewhere or the other. But the real problem is the youth, and that too youth men. When I go around in the villages, I actually see these boys with these smartphones hanging around, lurking around, and not doing much. We really need to tap into this potential which is there in the villages. We need to make them as agripreneurs. We need to get them to talk about these particular interventions that I just mentioned, the farmer producer organization, just taking the produce to the market, negotiating for better prices, involve them in packaging. India is known for its jugaad technology, which means cheap technology, cheaper ways to do things. And I'm sure all of these youth, with the exposure that they have to WhatsApps and to the YouTubes, etc., they do have those inherent capabilities. We just need to channelize and organize people better. So yeah, that was the limitation as well as the opportunity that I see.
Thanks so much, Alka. Very welcome comments in terms of value chain connecting to markets. And it even goes to the point that was made before, how do we bring both kind of the social mission and the commercial mission much more tightly aligned for the benefit of all. Alkesh, over to you. What are your thoughts on this economic issue in the rural space?
Sure. So I'll make a few overarching themes and then get into very specific areas where we worked in and found some successes. So the first, I would agree fully with Alka ma'am. We have the honor of working closely with the NRLM and also with the agricultural ministries, both at the national level and at the state level in a few states. And broadly, our lessons are pretty similar to what Alka ma'am said, and I'll get into specific details to give examples. But before I do that, my second theme would be the broad theme that you asked about is that, unless there is some growth, what is the use of just skilling? And yes, again, I just want to emphasize the crux is how do we get our GDP growth up and how do we get our productivity up, because they are very closely interlinked. And we, I want to also state the positive, which is, since 2005, about 250 million Indians have been lifted out of poverty, extreme poverty. And in China, the number is perhaps even higher. And these two, between India and China, perhaps have seen the highest amount between these two countries. We've seen the highest amount of people being lifted out of extreme poverty ever in the history of mankind. So we really should also acknowledge the positive story that a lot is happening, and that's all driven by GDP growth. And during when GDP growth in India was the highest, which was from about 202,000 to 2012, at that point in time, net employment in India grew by 1.5%. And it's after that, when growth slowed down, that people have started talking about zero employment growth or jobless growth, etc. I'm not saying it's zero, but perhaps it hasn't been as high as the 1.5% net. So it is really productivity growth and GDP growth that drives employment and will give youth an opportunity to get jobs and to get employment. And nothing can substitute for that. Now, this is a macro story. And it requires, as I was saying earlier, jobs to be created in high growth sectors. And typically the high growth sectors that at our level of the economy, which the bulk of youth can get into, whether it's rural youth or urban youth, will be construction, it'll be tourism and leisure, or tourism and hotels, and retail. These will be the three biggest areas. And this is historically, and perhaps you can add garments. These are historically how every country in the world has progressed. This is happening in India. Even if you see where employment was created, it's in these four sectors, and that's where youth or rural youth will get opportunities. But we don't work in any of this. we work in saying, even if all this was to happen, there will be millions and millions of rural Indians remaining in rural India for the next foreseeable futures, 30 to 50 years. And therefore, what does it take to improve their incomes in the rural economy, which is effectively farming and primarily by raising productivity and outcomes and outputs in farming and in off-farm jobs. And that's where we focus. And we do that by providing support to the Agricultural Ministry and Alka Madam's Ministry, NRLM, in a few states. And in agriculture, our prime focus is in UP, Bihar, and Orissa. So I'll share a couple of examples in Bihar and Orissa, and then hand over to the next person. And I can share many, many examples. I'll just share a couple. So as Alka Madam said, the challenge is that it is tough to get economies of scale because every farmer has got whatever 85% of India's farmers have less than two hectares. Therefore, how do you get access to inputs? How do you get access to the knowledge base to be able to improve your productivity? How do you get access to markets? And this is the real challenge. And as far as we know right now, there are two solutions. One is have functioning farmer producer organizations, and the second is to have some model of agri-entrepreneurs. Those agri-entrepreneurs are typically offered through ag tech firms like village level entrepreneurs who can provide a whole bunch of services to farmers to improve their income. So in Bihar, for example, and just one example, we did support the government to set up some FPOs. A very specific example I will take is of maize FPOs, where we were able to do 3-4 simple things that help them to improve their income by 22%. The simplest was weighing correctly. So weighing the maize correctly, because what happens is that there are no weighing. The weighing machines are there that the traders buy, but invariably the weights can be wrong by 5 to 10%. So the FPO just bought their own weighing machines, and this helped improve their incomes by 5 to 10%, depending on the exact location. The second was having moisture meters, because the price you get for maize depends on the moisture content. And what the traders would do is they would take the maize, break it with their hands or put it in the mouth to estimate moisture content, but that won't give you an exact percentage. So buying simple moisture meters is what really is the solution. And then it automatically provides a feedback loop to farmers, because they come to know, okay, if my moisture was so much, I would have got so much more money. So the next crop, they're more likely to get the right moisture meter, right? And the third is aggregation, which is the crux of it, which is, okay, aggregate, produce of few hundred farmers in that FPO, and then use it to sell to markets, which become easier, and link to processors, etc., etc. So often it is doing very, very simple and basic things, aggregating and providing very, very basic technologies that drives income up. So this is one example I'll give you, which is at a micro level. So in this whole, the number of FPOs we helped support the government in would not have been more than 10 to 20,000 farmers. It is really low, and it's very tough work because there's no shortcut to going FPO by FPO. And the government's goal is to reach, to have 10,000 such FPOs successful in India in the next few years. And I think it's an execution problem, and it's the right strategy. The next example I'll give you is from Orissa, which is more a macro solution we have, where we set up with the government, with the Department of Agriculture, an IVRS system that provides various advisory services to farmers. The thing is that it reaches millions of farmers. Very basic inputs are taken from farmers. How much, what's your crop? Where does it, are you on a highland or a lowland, etc., etc. Not more than 5-6 questions. And then through IVRS system, inputs are given to the farmers. Okay, your rains are likely to come in the next 2 days in this area, because all geo-tagged each of their farmland. So it's different advisory for each person. So it's very customized. And then using AI systems, a lot of inputs are taken that will tell people about pests, for example. So you see pests moving in a certain direction. So you can predict that the pest is going now in a south direction, and therefore you can tell the farmers that this is the pest. This is what you need to, that's likely to hit you in the next 2-3 days. This is what you need to do, etc., etc. And there's also an AI system where they're allowed to call in and ask questions. And we find that most of the questions are the same like 80% of the questions are repeated. It may be in a different form. So the AI engine automatically knows what to answer and it's given to them, right? The answer. So you can reach scale by technology, which was the point Madan is making. So it's a combination of technology, and we have many technological solutions. I'm just giving you one example. And this ground up method of aggregation, right? I gave the FPO example. There can be an agri-entrepreneur example, which I'm not giving you right now. So I would pause there with these two things. This is, I think, how India has to modernize its agriculture. I've just given you two, but maybe 20, 30 things like this need to be done.
Thank you so much, Alkesh. And I'm hearing certainly huge improvements that can be made in agriculture in terms of improvements in productivity, technology, aggregation, so much already. Linkage to markets, value chains, all of those things, plus the other sectors that could be growing. And I guess the question is, for the non-ag side, what are your thoughts for the rural context? People have talked about much more local processing opportunities post aggregation. People talked about other kinds of remote work, whether it's kind of rural digital opportunities. But what are your thoughts around non-ag? And I'm not sure if you've thought about that besides kind of course, construction in the urban centers, but what other opportunities are you seeing outside of ag?
Yeah. So I think the biggest opportunity, and I don't know whether you classify this as non-ag, is really off farm, right? Which is a whole bunch of things, from saying, fine, we do primary processing, grading, sorting. We have basic, warehouses, small warehouses at local points. We have pack houses, etc. So there is a lot of opportunity there. And, as important as that is just building local irrigation facilities, which is not the canals. Less than half of India's agricultural farmland is irrigated. But it's really, and again, an example from one of our Orissa projects, we found that the productivity of farmers was raised the most when they were able to build simple things like check dams or micro irrigation. Now, all this leads to off-farm jobs to build all these assets. And it, again, the linkage between, we think the biggest opportunity is the linkage between, for example, NRLM and NREGA. Because NREGA now offers the opportunity to build individual assets, now means for the last few years. And building micro irrigation assets is what literally doubles the income of farmers, because instead of getting one crop, they're getting 2 crops a year. So there are a whole bunch of off-farm opportunities. The non-farm opportunities, which have, you can say, okay, it has nothing to do with farm, including processing, is tougher to scale up. It has been our experience. We've tried many things, but I would say that nothing has reached scale. I mean, the biggest area in non-farm is really arts and crafts. I mean, again, I don't remember the exact number, but you have like in the tens of millions and potentially even like 50 million people in arts and crafts. But, there's no simple answer. What we've tried, so I'll give you 1 or 2 examples of what we've tried. So in one of the districts in Jharkhand, what we are doing is working with different government schemes to set up the equivalent of custom hiring centers. That's not the right word. So to be more specific, let's take woodwork, right? So if you take woodwork, you can set up a unit that costs 2 to 3 crores, which has basic machines that makes woodwork more efficient and more productive, and also therefore helps increase the income of woodworkers. So you need to go cluster by cluster, set up these units. These units cost 1.5 to 2 crores. The good news is that governments often have, through different ministries, schemes to allow groups of people to subsidize them by literally 80% and set up these units of 1 to 3 crores, let's call it, right? And perhaps you need 10 to 20 people who will run this unit, not more than that. But then they serve, so the model is they serve the 500 or 300 woodwork or artisans or jewelry makers around that, and the income of those few hundred people go up, right? But you can't do this in less than 2 to 5 years. It will take you 1 to 2 years to set up the project, another 3 years to stabilize it. And once you do that, you've got perhaps added income for 500 people because you boosted the productivity, you've got better outcomes, you've got better designs, you've got simple lathe machines, cutting machines, etc., to do all this. But just think, it's like the FPOs, right? And it's even tougher than the FPO. So you have to go 300 by 300 to do this. There's no simple, solution to take it to scale without 300 at a time. And, that's how we can do it. And I think India has to traverse this path. I don't know of, any other path in rural. This is not, frankly, not even fully rural. You could call it semi-urban. Is one of the models we've looked at. So I'll pause there. I mean, I can again give many other examples of the work we are doing.
No, that's fantastic, Alkesh. And it's almost as if, yes, there's not a single thing that should be done. It's almost this, new pact for rural growth that's needed, where there's much more thought around what are all of the drivers of growth and employment that could be happening in the rural space. At the moment, we're very siloed as, maybe this kind of training and move to urban areas, or this kind of very bottom up, livelihood development for the poor. But then how do you do the more value added activities that you're talking about across the rural space? So this kind of integrated thinking about rural economic development that includes all of the things that you're mentioning might be an area that this group can explore. And a lot of the questions are focused on these kinds of directions, if you will. And so one of the challenges that we've seen, and I'm going to turn to Alka for this, is in all of the work with the NRLM, SRLMs across the states, even that Alkesh was mentioning, whether it's Orissa, Jharkhand, or Bihar. So much of the progress and scale that we've seen has been with maybe the female populations that are older, that are seeing a lot of this kind of success. Alka, I want to kind of turn to you to ask, how do you think about the next work of NRLM, especially focused on youth? We have not necessarily seen a lot of great progress of these kinds of livelihood activities with young people. What are your thoughts on how to scale this significantly and this outreach to young people? How does that engagement work? And what are your thoughts on how this can come together?
Yeah, so indeed, again, as I would say, the NRLM journey, though, started off in 2011, but 2013-14 was the year when we really started working intensively with the states. And initial years we spent on mobilizing people, building the capacities, getting the women out of their homes, negotiating their basic entitlements, and negotiating for the various small consumption needs. That was what was being done through the revolving fund and the community investment fund that we were giving. But it is only after 2017-18 that a focus has been given on the livelihoods. And again, as an agrarian economy being the predominant economy, so where we started working was recognizing the role of women as farmers and working in the area of agriculture, how cheaper inputs can yield better incomes. That was the area that we started working in. Now, since we are talking a lot about the livelihood opportunities, and which do not really come in exclusively from agriculture, the point that I would like to mention over here is that it's actually the blue revolution, the fishery sector and the animal husbandry sector in which we have to invest. And we have to, and so, as a country, each of these families would have some poultry units, they would have some dairy units, but then the milk or the egg produce is just, consumed either by the family or locally relatives, etc. We need to organize them together. And the results are indeed good. We started off with one producer enterprise in the state of Uttar Pradesh in the year 2019, later part of 2019. And today we have roughly each of these members earning about 3,000 to 4,000 rupees extra per month. So those are the kind of organizations, and although it's at the cost of repetition, but that's what I would like to mention. So the off-farm is something that needs to be done. The other important thing that I think as a policy we haven't been able to do, but there is definitely a need to move in this direction. We need to get the industry to the rural areas. We need to get the industry out of the urban centers. That is probably going to yield very good results. Now, why I say this? So I'm aware of the apparel industry even in India is pretty good, and they do export a lot of apparel outside the country. And there is always a shortage. I'm just speaking about one particular industry where they need about 100,000 women to work with them every year. The attrition again over there is roughly 30 to 40%. So they keep on skilling, reskilling, getting in new people. And the reason for high attrition is because one, there is no clear-cut career path, one. And two, the cost of living in an urban area where these industries are located is not conducive. It doesn't match with the salary. Because again, in the export market, the international market, the product has to be very decently priced in order to sustain the competition. Now, if this is really a challenge, so and I'm aware of some of these industries who are now setting up their apparel industries in states like Jharkhand. I know at least two of these bigger houses who have set up their industries in Jharkhand. What happens is they get labor, they get a short supply of labor. The labor is also happy working nearer home. So that is the concept that we will have to develop and get all of this to the closer home. Now, we are also doing a program called the Rural Program. That's the spirit of the village and facilities of the urban areas. The Rural Program. So these are areas of growth where we see a potential decadal growth of population is good over there. And they do have a potential for being the engines of growth. These are the areas that we will have to tap on. We will have to give good facilities in terms of infrastructure, invite the industry. That framework will have to be given. And what does an industry look at? Industry essentially looks at a few things. One is labor, two is a short supply of electricity, three, good law and order situation, and fourthly, they look at good transportation. So the road connectivity should be there. So if you put in all of these things together in these urban clusters, which we are striving towards, I think they can be the potential centers for growth. So the policy that needs to be in place clearly now is to get the industry closer home. So that was one point that I wanted to mention. The other point that I just spoke about, so a lot of these value chain activities are happening. Now, for Alkesh mentioned some, I mentioned some, I know in this space, a lot of things are happening. I'll give you one example. And this was done by an aggregator or a cooperative company that we have known as NAFED. They all of a sudden realized this year that cherries have a good market here in Delhi and elsewhere in the country. So the Jammu and Kashmir cherries, they were not coming here. They were either being aggregated by one or two aggregators and then not reaching the market. So they entered into the cherry market. And this year, I remember, because I'm extremely fond of cherries, and I do know good quality cherries in Delhi costed not less than 200 to 300 rupees per kg. That's on the low side. 300 to 400 rupees per kg, and a bit here and there, it would be 1,000 rupees per kg. But the price of the cherries this year, I could source cherries, good quality cherries, at about 300 rupees kg. So that entire concept of farm to fork, we'll have to build upon that. And as I said, I am always very peeved by the fact that the local youth are not doing anything. So even in Manrega, one of the issues that I wanted to mention, because that was what Alkesh talked about. So irrigation has the highest multiplier effects to the income, and our consistent efforts to create sustainable assets in the form of irrigation facilities are being continued through the MG and REGS. A lot of irrigation potential has been created. And with this, we will be able to not only have more sustainable water, because India also has a deficit of continuous supply of water around the year, not only we'll have a good water table, but this also improves the farming. And the other very important thing, area in which we have to move is precision farming. One, there is a lot of scope over there. The greenhouse units are doing extremely well, so we need to talk about that. And thirdly, this entire talk about organic vegetables, it seems a little high placed or it seems a little out of place, but I'm sure if we get our agripreneurs involved, and I'd like to share an experience of TRIF. They are working in Sirohi district in the state of Rajasthan. And what they've done over there is that a small 1 acre piece of land, they asked the farmers to give just about 20 by 20 out of that entire piece of land, because it's not easy to get out of the staple crops. So they just said, do give us this particular size of land and you do vegetable cultivation over there. The farmers in that same land, they have been able to grow vegetables, get a better price because they also had a tie-up with the market. So these are the kind of things that will continue to be done innovatively, to movement to the urban areas. Because also remember, in India, the manufacturing sector is not growing as well. And if it's not growing as well, what are the service sector is where we have a lot of scope. So many of the youth are going into the service sector. The other sector where we do see a lot of demand and a lot of growth is the health sector. Hospitality this year has been an absolute chaos, but health sector is another area where we do see a lot of potential. And the activities we prioritized health now, because we'll be having a geriatric population, we'll have the COVID kind of things and the aftermath of pandemic situations. So that's one sector where we should focus very strongly upon and build our capital. Now we also see a lot of people now, not a lot of people to talk about in terms of NRLM, but then outside NRLM, a lot of people move to the other countries, especially the Middle Eastern countries, as labor. Skilled labor, number one, and certified as per the international standards. That's very, very important. The case of Philippines ruling the world with their nursing staff is just because many years back they had this American Nursing Association certification rolled out in the country and they are reaping the result. So we need to move on to international certifications, a bit of English speaking. All those are things which have to be done simultaneously. I don't say that this would take off the entire youth in that direction, but simultaneous efforts have to be made in this direction as well.
Thank you, Madam Alka. Very great kind of summary of a lot of the scope of the activities that need to happen. One quick maybe follow-up back to you, Alkesh, is there seems to be this need for a shift, and this is coming out in all of the questions and the comments now, on much more of the investment, of the focus on how do you build up these different sectors, these different business clusters, physical, place-based clusters, sectoral clusters. Who's investing in this? How do you have governments, financiers, et cetera, start to put money into this? And if I can ask you to, just in the interest of time, keep it a little short, but thoughts on the roles of the different commercial and government and social players to really move a lot of these things into the rural context. There's obviously a lot of under potential and growth and high returns that could be garnered here, both social and financial. How do you see this playing out in a very tangible way?
Yeah, so again, I think the government has got very specific schemes to do this. So first, it's fully recognized that we need to build out clusters, right? And as part of that, the main scheme that the government has is the one produce, one district scheme. So every district has to identify the one produce which they think they are, in a way competitively advantaged in, and therefore that gets built as a cluster. And that's really critical, because to build any clusters, you need a whole ecosystem, right? So then the government will put in its efforts there. So I just wanted to highlight that really, I think, is a great way forward and the right way forward. And second, I would say that I think the government fully recognizes the value of putting in the financing required or enabling the financing required. And various schemes have been launched. So an example is recently the Ag Infra Fund has been launched. And similarly, a dairy fund has been launched. I don't remember the exact name of that dairy fund. But the Ag Infra Fund has, we are providing some support to the government on this, to the Ag Ministry. But that scheme is gives loans of up to 2 crores to build out a whole series of assets that we've all spoken about in the last half an hour, 1 hour. And literally in the last 1 year, loans of about $1 billion have been sanctioned, which will help build the infrastructure to do everything we are talking about. And the aim is to build it out to about 12 billion book size. So there are many schemes like that, which I think will help to get infrastructure going in many of these areas.
Yeah, thanks for that. Honestly, I still haven't seen necessarily like a systemic kind of mapping of this way, that these are the clusters, these are the locations, and these are the kinds of investments required to bring in, as people in the comments and questions have been mentioning, the financing, the manufacturing, the kind of supports, to really almost shift where growth is happening to the rural space. So maybe that's one of the things that can be done going forward. One thing that I feel missing in some ways from this discussion, and I'm going to turn to you, Oliva, to share, is the connection to young people. I still feel that there's so much of youth, and this is coming out in the questions and comments from everyone, is how do young people really connect to these opportunities? Agriculture, off-farm, non-farm. There seems to be, at least from what we're seeing, quite a bit of disconnect where these schemes and programs are put together, but youth say, look, we're not interested in farming, or we don't see the productivity improvements, or this doesn't make sense to me, or they're told, what are your aspirations? Point number one, as Madan said, and they don't want to do any of this. So I just want to turn to you, Oliva, in terms of how do you actually make this connection to young people? How do you share with them these kinds of opportunities? How do you make this exciting, especially some of the off-farm related activities? What are your thoughts on this kind of engagement, and especially at scale?
Right. So thank you, Alice. And it was great hearing from Malkesh, Shalka ma'am, and Madan on the topics that they were discussing. So if I can just go a step back and, maybe start with, how do we define youth? So basically, youth, when we define a youth, it's basically a stage in the human development. It's a transition phase or a time when, one young child is transitioning from being dependent to being independent. So essentially, any decision that is taken at that juncture of that transition, critically impacts the future of that individual as well as the society in which that individual resides. So I think that the overlapping youth years are really the secret windows of opportunity to help these young people to thrive and reach their fullest potential. So I think what was probably is necessary is to ensure that how do they successfully transit from the education system or the training system to the employment sector, be it agri or non-agri. So but then how do we prepare these youth to the school or colleges to the employment? So that there, where basically, if whatever government schemes or training programs or employment opportunities are available, all of that information has to come to the, that world of opportunities has to open up to these rural youth. So one is that. Second is, particularly for the rural youth, one thing we realize is that the sectors in which they want to work are usually, not very inspirational, because either they have seen just somebody doing it in their community and they feel that this is the only thing that probably from the community from where I belong, I can probably do good in this sector. For example, in Jharkhand, a lot of women will opt to go for nursing because they have seen that larger community young girls who have gone into nursing and have done fairly well over there. So one thing is, what has worked in a lot of European nations, I was reading through this, they're calling it as job shadowing. So that's quite a new and refreshing concept. And I think it's quite relevant for our people as well here, because, even though there is an internet or there is a YouTube videos to which I access and get to see, what kind of jobs are available, the kind of work that I get to do. But if I get to spend some time with somebody who's actually doing a work in those jobs, that is going to help me, be it, textile, automotive, any other industry that you can think of. So spending some time, getting that mentors onboarded and having these youth, have access to these mentors, I think that is very crucial and very important for them to, decide and understand the various avenues that are available to them. So I think that that's very critical. One is catalyzing entire opportunities, government programs and policies, training programs, ITIs, diploma, other technical degrees, higher education avenues. Then bringing in the various employment opportunities, both formal as well as informal local sector jobs listed out for them to access, to understand the kind of perks and benefits each one have, the career trajectory that we are looking at post entering into a particular training or skilling or into a job. Where do I grow from here? I might join as an apprentice, I might join as an on-job trainee, but where do I move beyond 9 months, 10 months? Most of the government programs, I mean, of course, there have been some really good programs in terms of Alka ma'am is here. We have DDU-GKY, which is the largest skill training program for these young people. We have from the Ministry of Skill Development and Entrepreneurship, the Pradhan Mantri Kaushal Gramin Yojana, again targeting the rural people. But what we miss is, the last leg connect is missing, because you see, they do the training, they honestly do the training, and even the training providers are trying their best to get these people employed. Up till that, it is true. But once the training programs are linked to a certain benefit, a certain amount that these providers get after tracking these trainees post placement up to a period of 3 months to 6 months. But what is missing is, are we looking at the youth's transition point from there? Are we saying, we are just tracking whether you are retained in that particular job or not? We are not asking the youth that whether you're happy in the job, whether you want to do a reskilling, upskilling course, whether you want to, or we aren't even informing that you might have been a simple things, young girl from Jharkhand landing up in a tier 1 city like Bangalore. There are other opportunities available in terms of, in Bangalore, where you can explore. A study with DDU-GKY, I missed, referring to the document. It stated that, there was a lot of girl retention post placement in the DDU-GKY programs. Initially, one thought that probably, girls really it was a way of expressing the freedom. They, for the first time, they had gone out, so they wanted to retain in that jobs which were made available to them. But when the interview had happened and the research team had carried out the entire interview with these set of people, one came to the realization that they really did not move because they didn't know the next avenues for them to move. How do I transit from where I have landed? What is there for me? I have come from a rural village, and I am here in a tier 1 city. I don't have any connects, I don't have any peer network, any guide, any mentor who can tell me, okay, so I have a 6 months experience, so I might, have a better opportunity at an elsewhere place. So I think this critical mentoring process and aggregating all the opportunities and putting it there for the young men and women to take informed choices is very crucial. So I think that is here, it can be, sector agnostic to say, because that is true for every sector, including the farm sectors, what we look at. Yeah, so that's it from me.
Thank you so much for that. You've put forward so many wonderful solutions in a short period of time. And I think there does seem to be a disconnect for young people between all of the programs that Alkesh and Alka were mentioning, all of the shifts that are going on there, although there's so much more that can be done on a coordination basis of those kinds of investments in certain clusters and locations. There's a real kind of challenge with reaching the young people to share all these opportunities with them. Usually they're not very excited, or they don't know, or they don't have the role models, as you've been saying. But one thing that young people have been very excited about, maybe they don't recognize that it's in farm or off farm, but this idea of entrepreneurship. This has been kind of now amongst young people the thing that they are very, very excited about. And in many places and countries around the world, including India, entrepreneurship is now apparently the answer to absolutely everything. And so it's kind of interesting, and I'd love to turn to Madan for your perspectives, because I see another dichotomy right now, where on the one hand, people say entrepreneurship is everything for youth, and this is where jobs are going to come from, and this is what you should focus on. On the other hand, entrepreneurship is this exclusive club, that you were supposed to be entrepreneurial from birth, and it's, the Silicon Valley perspectives that only a few people can be entrepreneurs and it's not for everybody. So how do you actually have mass entrepreneurship for so many young people? And so would love to turn to Madan. You've been working on this issue for years. How do you see this growing at scale for tens of millions of young people, especially in the rural context?
If our mission at Games comes alive with all the things that we need to do 10 years from now, I'll have a very concrete answer, but it's still work in progress. But here are a few dimensions to think about, Alice. One, the definition of entrepreneurship, I think, is too skewed and too flawed, right? We think, if you ask, I am in Bangalore, the Silicon Valley of India, the tech Harley, now it's being called, whatever, right? Entrepreneurship is all about unicorn valuations, growth, etc., etc. But if I were to ask in the same city of Bangalore, a street vendor selling bhel puri on the streets of Bangalore, he will say, I'm doing this because I have nothing else to do, right? So it is the necessity-driven entrepreneurship, right? I think at GAME, we believe that there is a missing middle, which is the opportunity-driven entrepreneurs, who can not just create incomes for themselves, but can support 5 or 10 other people. And if you look around, we'll find several people like that. But we haven't focused on them because the conversations are either to this extreme of startups, valuations, etc., or looking at entrepreneurs as beneficiaries, which is the worst thing to happen, right? So at OneBridge, the rural enterprise that I run, I've managed to get 7,000 such youth. I was smiling when Alka ma'am was talking about these youth sitting around in the village squares playing games on smartphones. And I see that as a fantastic asset, because if you can tell them that the same things you play on the smartphone, if you can do 5 other things, you can start earning 100 rupees a day. We have now 7,000 people between the age group of 18 to 30 who are earning about 6,000 to 7,000 rupees from us, because they're delivering a variety of digital services to the villages and bridging the digital literacy issue and the trust deficit that exists in the villages, right? So I think if all of us can focus on the other myth that I want to bust is that, we talk about the new buzzword in town is the gig economy and how everything will move to the gig. I mean, the village youth have been on gigs forever, right? In the sense that you wake up in the morning, you work on your dad's farm, which is half an acre. In the afternoon, you're helping your mom milk cows and selling the proceeds of that. In the evening, you're tagging along with your friend who's trying to sell insurance or SIM cards, right? And some are paid, some are unpaid. In fact, I was speaking to some folks from the petroleum retail industry, and I'm saying, listen, I've seen kids who need to earn 100 rupees. If you do a 24-hour gig at a petrol bunk non-stop, you get paid 500 rupees. And I have a lot of our youth who say, when I run out of money, I just go land up at the nearest petrol bunk. I spend one full day and I earn 500 rupees. That's good enough for the week. So I think if we can leverage that energy that exists where they're comfortable going from one gig to another, but we have to organize it and structure it in such a way that there is some predictability of income. And if we are to provide some kind of a social security benefits to the family, schemes abound. There are many schemes that exist, but the last mile connectivity to the households do not exist. So on one hand, if you are to create a safety net, to structure the gigs around in the village in some form and organize it for both agri and off-farm work, and provide the youth a sense of purpose to say, you're not just loitering around and wasting time, but to Aliva's point, can you create a career out of this? Can you earn 10,000 rupees? Can you earn 15? Can you earn 50? In fact, we've just started a pilot in a village in North Karnataka called Wadi, where we've taken 25 such girls sitting at home, but who know how to use a smartphone. And we have taken a challenge that in 18 months' time, you will be earning 60,000 rupees a month. Right? And how do you then make that happen? Right? So I think if we can kind of de-romanticize this whole idea of being an entrepreneur, but at the same time make it as an aspirational career path, and also say that you can be an entrepreneur. And I mean, for some of us, Alice, if you've not watched this movie, you should watch this movie called English Winglish. right? Where it's a lovely scene where this woman at home is making laddus, Indian sweets. And she just says, I'm a homemaker making, these sweets. But she goes into an English class and the teacher there says, so you're not just a homemaker making laddus at home, you're an entrepreneur. And you should see her eyes light up because she's got an identity. I think that's what we need to do to tons of businesses out there and instill that identity and say you can do more. And as a society, how can we support them with access to finance, ease of doing business, et cetera, then we can unleash that spirit, right? The last point I want to make is that, I'm listening to the conversations. I'm just reminded of this ice hockey great who said, I skate to where the puck is going to be and not where the puck was. So I think, especially as we reimagine rural, we should probably look at what are the forces that will reshape rural in the next 3 to 4 years and what can we do to sow the seeds of that rural today. Pandemic has exposed how centralized supply chains are so fragile, right? For long, right from Gandhiji's time, we've been talking about self-reliant villages and distributed economies. Ela Ben Butt has written a fantastic book called The 100-Mile Communities and how you can start reimagining a variety of essential goods and services being available within 100-mile communities. Food, clothing, shelter, banking, health, education, right? And I think the pandemic has exposed the fact that we need to really start thinking distributed economies now, which I think is the future. Two, how can we define common infrastructure? I think Alpa ma'am, you made a fantastic point about how do you use Manrega to build infrastructure. Now, so instead of a large FMCG building its own supply chain, can we create common supply chains? Can we then say, can we use this as a soft and a hard infrastructure to ride out so that nobody else has to invest? So collaborative infrastructure, I think, is the key. And the third is that I think we're still grappling with how much of smartphone penetration is changing people's life. But smartphone to me is the tip of the iceberg. You take IoT, you take drones, 3D printing, AI, ML, and the whole virtual reality. I think it's going to change the landscape of rural. What as a community today, are we doing to build models on that so that we can catch the wave early and ride that? And I think, especially for youth, these will be exciting things to talk about. Rather than, talking about the 1960s, can we talk about the 2050s? Yeah, so I can go on and on, but
thanks so much, Manan. And just to note to all of our attendees and panelists, I've been incorporating the questions and all the things that I've been asking throughout the panel, rather than having a separate, dedicated Q&A at the end. So this has been just so everyone knows. And so, Madan, this is fantastic to hear a lot of these ideas. I guess two follow-ups, if I may, based on so much of what people are asking about is how do you do this at scale, if you will, in terms of all of these programs you're mentioning are fantastic, whether it's 50 people, 25 girls, or even 7,000. We're not getting there. And if you look at, for example, ALCA's program and NRLMs and the SRLM activities, these are scaled, huge programs. So how do we think about this? Because everything we're seeing in terms of incubators, accelerators, they're tiny. And there does seem to be this massive disconnect as we get to scale. Does it connect perhaps to what Alkesh was talking about and kind of these business clusters, if you will, or these MG Narega programs that somehow there's an entrepreneurial component to it? Do we create what Aliva was talking about in terms of much more guided journeys and role models for young people? But I'm really struck by how there's all these fragmented considerations rather than this systemic or institutional approach to this challenge. I still don't know the direction that we're headed in for this. So would love to get your thoughts.
So, two thoughts here, Alice. One is that I think we have to stop thinking pilots and start thinking at population scale from scratch. I think, as they say, India is a graveyard of successful pilots. We've had enough and more of pilots. But if we can incorporate scale thinking, especially in a collaborative way, right? Because scale thinking also does not happen when you just scale one thing. We spoke about how rural and youth is a complex adaptive system, right? One actor cannot go in and there and make all the changes, but if the entire ecosystem comes together, puts on a scale lens and say, you know what, again, if you look at it, you take the 700 districts, and even if you take 10 tehsils per district or 15, right? We need 10,000 youth who are empowered as leaders. And if you then plug them into these communities and say, listen, this 100 miles radius is yours. We as an ecosystem will make everything possible to make you successful. And if we can define what does success look like for that community, and that will vary from community to community, I don't think it is such a large problem. I don't think it has happened because we haven't come together with that scale thinking in mind as a community. Now, Alkesh may say, listen, at Gates, we're thinking scale. I might say in my entity, I'm thinking scale. Alka will say, of course, we're thinking scale. But individual initiative scaling and the sum of parts is not greater than the whole. And we got to come together. And it's not I don't think it's such an insurmountable problem.
Fantastic. And I think even just my own reflections of some of the successes that we've seen is very much, Madonna, along those lines, where we're bringing together different stakeholders, even on this panel, to think about how to work together, but how do you do it in a very contextual way? What's happening locally for those young people? And I think there's a question, though, around how do you have this kind of individualized connection to youth? And this is one of the themes that seems to be emerging as well. And I wonder, from an entrepreneurial perspective, Madan, from what you've seen, how can you create this kind of more customized approach, but again, in a mass way? Any perspectives there?
I don't think there's any other answer other than creating a local ecosystem. I mean, just to give you an example, I've been an entrepreneur since the last two decades. And my first brush with entrepreneurship was when I found one neighbor whom I considered as a duffer. Went out, wrote a business plan and raised money. And I said, if this joker can do it, why can't I do it? Right? And everything I've learned, and if you look at the evolution of the Bangalore ecosystem, it's been that, right? One relatable role model inspires another. And you say, hey, if this guy can do it, I'll learn. In fact, I got my first business plan template from this guy. And he said, this is how you write a business plan. And it just exploded. So imagine if you take a microcosm, take Ramgarh, where you mentioned as one of the districts, right? So if we can break that down into a block level and at a village level and say, is there one relatable role model? How do we create that fellow as a success? Right. We've seen that happen over and over in real life. When we take an illiterate rural youth and we transform that guy to be a English-speaking, computer-literate knowledge worker, his homecoming is the sight to watch. The whole village is running behind this guy. In fact, we made people go around back home in suits, in a car. And every parent out there says, I want my son to be like this. How can you do that? So I think we need to do it in a very conscious way. It has to be local. I don't think there's any national movement. But maybe we need to create 10,000 local movements that will be like the fireflies rising at a national level.
Absolutely. That's very exciting, and a very exciting vision. And there's so much around this actually session has been incredibly exciting in terms of ideas and directions that the group can pursue. As I said, I've been incorporating a lot of the chats throughout the questions and the chat comments throughout this panel. What I'd love to do in the last few minutes, if we can, is maybe go around to each of you and to leave 1 or 2 minutes for any parting thoughts on themes from the session that you'd like to leave with the audience, personal reflections or call to action. I'll leave it quite open to the group, and maybe we'll start at the top with Alka, Alkesh, Aliva, and then back to you, Madan, and I'll close up. So maybe starting off there, Alka, over to you. Thoughts for our audience in the closing 1 or 2 minutes here.
So I'll take 1 minute over here to give you one example of how we can do it at scale. So we have somebody called the banking correspondent cadre that we've done. We have 28,000 of these across the country today. And the success story is like this. I met a woman and she came and she opened her laptop from a village. She opened her laptop and she said, give me your Aadhaar card and I will be able to draw money for you. Unfortunately, at that point in time, my bank was not linked to Aadhaar. It's a separate story. But anyway, somebody else came in and she gave the money, etc. So I said, so how have you been faring? So she said, well, when I started off, I was able to earn about 1,000 rupees. Then I kept on going to the people and people saw the ease of not going to the bank and coming to me. Eventually, I have not only been able to earn about 10,000 rupees per month, I have now bought a new laptop and I've also bought a new scooter to go around and cover more and more villages. So, it's that taste of success which mobilizes people. And we in the government have to create these models and I know a lot of people are hating the word model. So create that enabling policy. So based on this success, we are now saying we need to aspire for having one such banking correspondent in every gram panchayat or each unit of a village. So we are moving in that direction. The second thing that I just wanted to say was, it's the social connect. Now we have these community resource persons. So I sit in Delhi or I sit in Bhopal and I go and tell people, hey, you should do your farming like this. It doesn't work that way. But if you train somebody from the community and you incentivize this person to go and talk back to the community and tell him what do you want, the delivery would be very, very fast. So, and it would be very efficient delivery. So the bottom line that I wanted to mention here was any model would fail, any enabling environment would fail without the social mobilization. And what I see today is that the male youth in the villages, their potential has to be harnessed. It remains to be harnessed as yet. We need to work in that direction. We need to use them. And for this, various programs will definitely help. The last point that I just wanted to mention over here is, and because you just mentioned we have a variety of panelists over here. So we also realized as government, we can't be involved in marketing. We can't do value addition on our own. It is for entrepreneurs like Madan, and it is for other aggregators and other sellers in the market who have a huge presence. We need to connect to them. We need somebody else to come and organize these economic activities. And I'm sure, and when we work with these bigger people, somebody like Madan, they are the ones who are going to teach the skills of small entrepreneurship to our village guys as well. So that's the last point that I wanted to make over here.
Thank you so much for that. Over to you, Alkesh, for closing remarks.
Sure. So I'll just make one point, which is that, whichever program we support, whether it's enabling businesses or anything else, I think we really have to use technology to reach scale. And that is without that, it's pretty tough, because then it's, cascaded training model or things like that. And the technology, even in the example that Alka Madam gave about BCs, the reason it can succeed so well is that there is a huge underlying technology that makes it work at scale, which is UPI. And UPI includes an Aadhaar-enabled payment system that allows you to withdraw cash just using your fingerprint. So then it's possible to scale. So every example we've seen that's scalable, we really have to use technology. And India being India, that technology has to be used in a phygital way, which is that technology has to be combined with some frontline person who's assisting people. And to me, that is really the crux of how to have these scalable programs.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Oliva.
Yes, so I think Alkesh, Madan and Alka ma'am have already spoken about, collaboration models, prototyping and, technology. So maybe the last bit which I can think of, including all three that they have spoke about is on, policies, more youth-friendly policies and mainstreaming it with, the overall rural development policies. Where basically we do not ask the youth to be future ready, but rather we take youth's participation in development of all these policies, and so that they are a part of the process and they have a sense of agency in these policies. Yeah, so that's a closing remark.
Wonderful. Thanks, Oliva. And finally, Madana, over to you.
Yeah, I'll focus on the call to action. I'm saying, we've had over 150 people participate in this workshop, and we still have a sizable group of them here. So two things. One, as a group, we need to change the narrative. I was asking my niece a few months ago to write her perspective of rural, and she said, hey, rural are all poor people, villages have no, so it's not that. But it's not a rosy picture either, right? But I think the onus is on us to change the narrative and keep talking about positive stories and then thinking about how to scale it. Two, we need to come together. I would consider this colloquy, this particular panel, to be a failure if no action comes out of it, right? So my request to each of the participants is, can you think of one thing that you can do with everybody together? Share it with Triff, and let's figure out, hey, can we get together once in another 3 months to figure out which are those 100 ideas that we can work together on, right? And I can assure you from my side, open to all ideas and to figure out anything that can really impact at population scale. Let's make things happen together. And I think that's the rallying cry that I have.
Wonderful. Thanks, Madana. And absolutely, I feel like you've captured it perfectly in the sense of there are definitely challenges, but we're here to work the problem together as a community, and that there's huge potential in rural, huge potential in growth and working with young people and harnessing that. So with that positive end, if we can, would love to close out the panel. Thank all of our wonderful speakers and attendees. Great suggestions coming out of it. I've already talked to TRI and Neeraj and others. We'll send out some notes and summaries to everyone that's attended, and would love to connect with everyone going forward to really operationalize so much of what we're talking about. So once again, deep gratitude to everybody, and looking forward to working together in the future. All the best.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye,
you.
everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much.
Very
It was
exciting.
wonderful. It was absolutely wonderful. Thank you,
Thank you.
Alice.
Love
Thanks.
that.
Take